After 5 weeks in the NFL, we now believe that we have enough information to put together a top 10 list. So Zach and I, we had some disagreements on these items. We had a little bit of back and forth, but we negotiated, we compromised, we worked together as a team, and we came up with just one singular Battle of the Beltway top 10 list. Now, we're going to run through this list for you, and then afterwards, we're going to talk about some of our disagreements and some of the areas that we think are kind of up for grabs. But this is what we agreed together mutually. So if you think that we're incredibly wrong, you can't yell at just one of us. You have to yell at both of us. Up first, at number 10, is the Carolina Panthers. Now, I have to start this off by saying this was actually Zach's pick to put this at number 10, not mine. I have to give that little precaution because everyone's going to be like, oh, Rob, you definitely put them there. No, this wasn't me. I had them at 11 or 12. We compromised. Zach picked Carolina. So we have Carolina at number 10. We know that they just lost to the Eagles in a, well, let's be honest, embarrassing fashion. Sam Darnold looked absolutely terrible. 3 interceptions, including one incredibly costly and just, if we're being honest, terrible life choice that he made throwing to Darius Slay. It just was not good. The game is something that the Panthers are going to want to put behind them. They are going to want to forget about this one. I don't believe that this is a good indication of the Carolina team. I think that they are better than they played on this past weekend. And at the end of the day, I gave the Browns credit for having beaten the Chiefs in week 1 other than a punt botch. I feel like I have to give Carolina that same exact sort of leniency for having a punt blocked. Those are not things that commonly happen. It's a freak accident that just turns the tide of games. Important to mention, Carolina will also be getting C.J. Henderson and Stephon Gilmore. Big upgrades for them. Their defense is going to be probably one of the top 3, top 5 on-paper defenses in the league. It's the real deal. We have the Carolina Panthers at number 10.
Next up, we have and I will own up and say, yes, I did vouch for the Panthers. After weeks of saying, I think they're fakers, for me, it was the acquisitions of Henderson and Gilmore that kind of changed my mind, and seeing how well they do on a target-by-target basis with DJ Moore versus non-DJ Moore receivers. Anyways, thanks for the shout-out, Rob. Number 9, we're going to go with Kansas City. Once again, some discrepancy here as well that we'll talk about at the end. But at the end of the day, yes, we get it. They lost to the Bills big time last night. I mean, it was awful. They got trounced by the Bills. They also lost to the Ravens, and they lost to one of the other best teams in the league right now, the Chargers. I don't think that's indicative of a team that's really that bad. That 2-3 record to me is actually a little bit misleading because of the amount of talent that they played against with the other team's offenses. With that said, the defense is terrible. They've surrendered the most points in the league to anybody. So they're the worst when it comes to being able to hold teams from scoring. They're missing Chris Jones. Chris Jones is the heart and soul of that defense. He's that, D tackle, nose tackle, depending on the formation in which they line up. The man's a monster. He has a wrist issue right now. As soon as he comes back fully healthy, I expect that defensive line to get more pressure because that opens up Frank Clark on the outside, gives the linebackers a better chance to not have to cover for too long, considering their linebackers kind of struggle in coverage. And I think the Chiefs also probably need to consider benching Daniel Sorensen after giving up 2 big touchdowns last week. But with this said, I think that they 100% deserve to be in that top 10. Towards the end of it, though, I get it. Mahomes, he's incredible, but he's looked a little rough. But trust me, they're not going to stay low for long. They're not going to stay down for long. Andy Reid has only ever had 2 losing seasons, I believe, as a head coach. I cannot back that up with facts right now, but that's off the top of my head, I'm pretty sure. Maybe 3 after the end of his time in Philly. And I fully 100% anticipate them coming back from that.
Up next at number 8, we have the Baltimore Ravens. Now, you all know that I am a big fan of the Baltimore Ravens, but I am also a realist. I recognize that the Ravens have beaten some teams this year. They're 3-1. But of those teams they've beaten, the only team that I really considered to be a significant win was against the Chiefs. The Lions game was a little bit disheartening, didn't feel great about that. The Raiders game, obviously not my favorite thing in the world. I felt good about the Denver game. I felt like that was a good turnaround game and something that supported the Ravens as being a top 10 team in the NFL, but I also recognize that they are a team with significant injuries. They are also a team that significantly outperforms their lack of talent in certain key positions. This makes them an incredibly difficult team to evaluate on any objective basis. You look at their roster and you say, I don't think this is necessarily the best team. And yet they show up, they put up rushing yards, they break records. They have Lamar Jackson passing for over 300 yards a game. They're one of those enigmas where you can't really explain why they are so consistently good. They're just one of those teams that succeeds for whatever reason. I don't necessarily know how they're going to perform against some of these bruisers, just the raw, talented teams of the NFL. But just on coaching, scheme, and play style alone, I think the Baltimore Ravens have earned a spot in the top 10, and I have them currently sitting at number 8.
At number 7, we have where the Baltimore Ravens in 96 technically originated from, the Cleveland Browns, the formerly known as the Baltimore Ravens in a way, I guess. Mm-hmm. The Browns they're a team, when I was looking at my rankings, I was trying to put them higher than 7, and I just couldn't. You know, it's like they're so good in so many different ways. The defense is so impactful. They're awesome. They're relentless. And I know that, they did just let up 47 points yesterday, but it doesn't change the fact that they're also playing against one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL right now. I think that between the rushing attack for the Browns, which is the most potent in the NFL on a per game basis, and everything in between, they've definitely earned a top 10 spot. Baker Mayfield holds them back. That's why they're 7. If they had Justin Herbert or Patrick Mahomes or healthy Russell Wilson, whomever it may be, maybe Deshaun Watson, not to bring him up necessarily. We don't talk about him a lot here, but if everything works out and things are cleared, they could trade for him in the offseason conceivably. All of a sudden, the Cleveland Browns are one of the best teams in football, and that's a fact. And I think that they're closer to that 2 or 3 spot as opposed to being 7. But right now, with Baker there, with the defense letting up 47 points yesterday, but still being very strong, I'm putting them here. We're putting them here at 7.
At number 6, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. This Florida retirement home has a very potent offense. Surprisingly, their defense has not looked very impressive. I'm not really sure why. They have many of the same players as last year. We know that there have been some injuries, and that definitely is a problem that has weighed on them. And you can see this in the games they've played, that their defense is not 100%. I hope they get that together. But when I look at their offense, what I see Evans, Godwin, and you're having Antonio Brown as your number 3 receiver. I cannot name a single team in the NFL who can cover Antonio Brown with their 3rd best defensive back. I cannot name a single team. To make things more complicated, Rob Gronkowski. I cannot name any team that can cover those 4 players. There will always be a mismatch. And for a defense, that's pretty scary. There's always going to be one receiver on that team that you just don't have an answer for. And I trust Tom Brady to always find that receiver. With that said, there are a lot of improvements that need to be made right now. Tampa Bay in week 4 and 5, I don't think is as strong and healthy as Tampa Bay in week 1. Yes, they blew out the Dolphins. I think a lot of teams this year are going to blow out the Dolphins. I think against very good teams, those injuries and that defense are going to start showing up. So we have Tampa Bay. We feel very good about them, but we're holding them at 6 for the time being.
At number 5, we're going to talk about a Los Angeles team. Probably not the one that you're expecting at 5, though. We're talking the Rams. The reason the Rams are not in the top 3, at least based on this list and our consensus that we kind of came to, and we'll talk about all of this once again after we kind of go through this initially. The Rams struggled against the Cards a couple weeks ago. That's okay. We understand that. Things happen. But then the Rams almost lost to Geno Smith. Russell Wilson gets hurt. Middle finger looks all sorts of jacked up. If y'all want to look that up, that was pretty gross, but kind of cool to look at if you ask me. And, Russ is out for the next 6 to 8 weeks. But in that last quarter and a half that Geno Smith was in the game, the man was lighting them up. It was until that end of the game interception that really kind of changed things. Like, Geno did what Geno Smith does. But the Rams should have never been in a situation where they could have allowed that to happen. So, in my opinion, the Rams top out at number 5 right now. The team's too good to continue to underperform. The defense is too good to underperform with the amount of star power that they have there, between the line not getting enough pressure and then the linebackers just slipping coverage assignments consistently, and even the secondary. The team's too good to underperform for like a consistent period of time. And I think the coaching is pretty amazing. I'm a Sean McVay guy. Like, he's one of the best that there is, one of the brightest minds in football. The personnel, the star power is insane. The depth is not amazing, but still, it's enough to get them through. It's enough to make sure that this is a team that can compete consistently and always. So I think that they'll get it right. I don't think that the last 2 weeks are completely indicative of where it is that the Rams are going to, hence how they secured that number 5 spot with us.
Yeah, and Tyler Lockett did trip on that game-ending interception. If he doesn't trip there, that could have been a very different game. Up next, number 4. Brace yourselves, especially Zach, even though he's kind of the one that had him up this high. Brace yourselves.
Yep.
The Dallas Cowboys at number 4. Now, you're going to notice an immediate discrepancy here, that why are the Buccaneers at 6 and the Cowboys are at 4, despite the fact that the Buccaneers have beat the Cowboys in head-to-head? There's a couple reasons for that. One, first game of the year, hard to put a lot of weight on that. We don't necessarily blame the Buffalo Bills for losing to the Steelers in week 1, considering what they've done in weeks 2 through 5, right? In that same way, we saw a Dallas Cowboys team that was starting to come together in week 1. Since that, they have been a force to be reckoned with. When I look at this team, I see a team that is capable of running the ball down your throat. I see a team that is capable of beating your defensive backs and beating you through the air. I see a team that is capable of pressuring your quarterback, getting to him, sacking him, and I see a team that is capable of defending passes and making big plays on the ball and getting interceptions. I am seeing a team that is firing on basically every cylinder. They have playmakers at every position right now. They have gotten to this sort of paradoxical level where I'm afraid to play Dallas Cowboy players in my fantasy team because they have so many players capable of taking on that workload that I'm afraid to start any individual one because they don't need any individual player. They're not reliant on any one player on offense. This team, by far, in my opinion, has been the most improved team that we have seen from last year to this year. Trayvon Diggs is looking absolutely insane. His turnaround, if he doesn't get comeback player of the year, I'll be shocked. I know there's a lot of really good candidates, but he has turned his career around. Cowboys are at 4 for us, and we're not really flinching on that one. We'll talk. I mean, maybe they're even better than that. We'll discuss that one a little bit more at the end as well.
Yes, we will. We will. I hate the Cowboys, but good for them. Number 3, we have another Los Angeles team. So I guess the only other Los Angeles team, technically. But I still always in my heart think of them as the San Diego Chargers. So the Chargers are special. This is a special team, mostly led by a special quarterback and one of the best rookie coaches I've ever seen in all my time watching football. Brandon Staley, it's funny because he says things that everybody knows, but he says them and gets applauded for it. And it's just like he brings sense to things. He brings awareness to things that like maybe the less knowledgeable football fan wouldn't necessarily know, but like in the community itself, like he's almost like providing this bridge between like knowing so much about the game but being able to connect with fans. And it's awesome. Like even just from like a fandom perspective, like a Chargers fan right now is a happy fan. Now, let's talk about why they're sitting at number 3. They beat the Browns, the Raiders, the Chiefs, and Washington. All 4 teams were playoff teams last year. They did lose to the Cowboys, but that loss came in week 2, and I don't think anybody really expected the Cowboys to be what they are right now at that point in time. Herbert is truly one of the best quarterbacks that we've ever had in NFL history, like statistically already, at least to start a career. I'm not going to sit here and be like, yo, this guy's going to be a GOAT or anything like that. There's just a very good chance that he's going to be one of the most productive quarterbacks to play the game if he maintains what he's doing right now. In his first 20 starts of his career, he already has 50-plus touchdowns. Nobody's ever done that. He has 5 games over 400 or 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. Nobody's ever done that. I mean, the dude is bananas. He's a monster. So then you throw in the fact that the Chargers have a good defense. It's not the best defense, but they're solid on every single level, and they have star power at every single level. Derwin James is finally healthy. Joey Bosa, for the most part, is healthy. And you kind of have like this collection of talent that just seems to be gelling together with new coaching. So the Chargers, according to our podcast, are number 3, but we'll talk about that after as well. Let's go to number 2, Rob.
Number 2, we have the Arizona Cardinals. Despite being 5-0, they will not be given the number 1 spot. It is important to remember that they probably should be 4-1 if the Vikings just didn't have some weird curse where they habitually blow game-winning field goals. This is just a Vikings theme. They really should have lost that game. But despite that, they are 5-0. Just win, baby. And their offense is monstrous. They have their skill positions decked out for pretty much everything they need to do offensively. One of the biggest reasons that they've been accelerated to the top in recent weeks is we had a lot of stock in the Rams being a dominant team this year, and the Cardinals basically tossed them out of the club. They didn't win the Derrick Henry tossed out of the club award, but they tossed the Rams out of the top 3 conversation. Their defense has been surprisingly good when they've needed it to be. And that combination, that's how you win games. They might not be the best team in the NFL right now if you look at raw talent, if you look at coaching, if you look at the roster in general. But the fact of the matter is they're winning games. They've beaten the Titans, they've beaten the Rams, and they've beaten the 49ers. All of these teams we either expected or still do expect to make the playoffs this year. Those are impressive wins, and the Titans game was an absolute blowout in week 1. So, not that bad when it comes to strength of schedule, but they're winning these games. The Vikings game, a little bit of a knock against them, but at the end of the day, I think they're worthy of the 2 spot. They have been quite a pleasant surprise this year in what was supposed to be an absolutely stacked division. So we have Cardinals sitting at 2.
And that leaves our number 1 spot to, you guessed it, the Buffalo Bills. Yeah, the Buffalo Bills. In case you're not paying attention to the football world right now, the Bills they're a nightmare to deal with. If you're a Bills fan, you're happy. They're breaking so many tables in Bills Mafia right now. Like they're losing their stuff up there, I'm sure, at every single tailgate.
Leg drops,
Um,
elbow drops from the top
oh
rope.
man, the people's elbow going through those tables, so many. There was a gender reveal that somebody did in Bills Mafia where they jumped on a table, it popped a balloon, and blue smoke came out. It was one of the best things I've ever seen. But rightfully so, these Bills fans are excited, man. The Bills have been, since week 1, and I'll get to that in a second, the most dominant team in football. And that is a fact. They've played some weak teams, and I'll talk about that in a couple minutes too, but they have been the most dominant team in football. They beat the Chiefs by 3 scores, the Texans by 6 scores, they beat Washington by 3 scores, and the Dolphins by 5 scores. The strength of the victory is important. It matters. It matters to both of us. It should matter to everybody, and that's the truth. Even if the other team's not very good, the fact that they blew these guys out instead of playing down to their level is important. Now, back to that week 1 loss. That is the only thing that could come back and haunt the Bills. Not the fact that they lost to the Steelers in week 1, because nobody knows what's going to happen in week 1, and that's the truth. But the Bills potentially showing that they can play at that level that they did in week 1. That is what's scary if you are a Bills fan. With that said, they've shown no life or anything like that. Nothing that even remotely relates to that at this point. Since that loss, they've dropped 156 points on all of those teams and only given up 41. 4 consecutive blowouts. Blowouts are not freebies in the NFL, regardless of who you are. And then holding the Chiefs' offense, considered one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL, and sacking or hitting Mahomes as much as they did after they spent so much draft capital and so much money on a new line, it's a big deal. It's a pretty big deal. The Bills are number 1. They should be number 1. But let's talk about some of our discrepancies, Rob. I want to hear what you got to say.
All right, so first of all, and this one is going to be controversial just because anytime you say the Chiefs and you don't immediately start bowing down to them and saying Mahomes is the greatest of all time, there's going to be controversy, right? I do not even have the Chiefs on my personal list being top 10 right now. Now, I know that a lot of people are going to take issue with that, and I'm fine with that. The fact of the matter is the Chiefs have one of the most lightning, explosive offenses in the NFL. But do you know what the problem is? A lot of other teams have caught up. They've realized we are in a league where offense matters. And so you have these teams that are starting to become stacked out on offense. The Cardinals right now are stacked out on offense. The Browns right now are stacked out on offense. The Vikings, you could even argue with the exception of Kirk Cousins, stacked out on offense. Tennessee, their skill position players, you have to handle Derrick Henry while also covering A.J. Brown and Julio Jones, stacked out on offense. This is when your defense starts to become a liability. And what we have seen from the Chiefs is that their defense is playing at such a low level that their explosive offense cannot make up for it. The big reason that this is a problem is because we all know Patrick Mahomes is a gunslinger. He is the kind of person where he makes big plays happen. He will toss the ball up knowing he has Tyreek Hill, knowing that he has Travis Kelce. The problem is when you go for these crazy, dangerous plays to try to come back from a game where you're behind 2 or 3 scores, that is when you can start getting yourself into positions where you dig yourself deeper in a hole. And we saw that a little bit last night. You had a game, the weather wasn't great, you get behind, you start playing recklessly, what happens? You start throwing interceptions, you start digging yourself deeper in that hole. This is the problem with teams that have really bad defenses and rely on their offense to be explosive and to not just throw the ball away, punt it, and live for another day. Mahomes likes taking big chances. Sometimes that means he goes from 21-0 Texans up in the playoffs, ending that game with 50-some points and a 3-4 score lead. Other times, you throw a couple picks and you end up losing by 3 scores. The defense is a liability. So I have the Chiefs actually outside of my 10 until that defense can get their act together.
And that's completely fair. As as you had stated before, obviously we have the Chiefs on this list. In this list, the back few is my order. So like those that like 10 through 6, I believe, right? Or 10 through 5 maybe. Um and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I just don't know who I can justify to put
Right.
ahead of the Chiefs, and that's how they ended up on my list. Now, I've got an issue to take here too. It's mostly in my top 4. The first one I'm going to talk about is I think that the Cowboys should be higher than the Cardinals. Now, I get it. It's just the first time that we're doing top 10 power rankings, and it's one spot. So you could easily put one over the other. So, like, if we're putting one over the other, I feel like the one over the other should be the one that accurately reflects reality. And I understand that the Cardinals are still undefeated, but the Cowboys have dominated their opponents more than the Cardinals. The Cowboys have also played better teams. So I'm looking at the schedule right now. The Cardinals, 38-13 against the Titans week 1. It's a pretty big blowout against a decent team, an okay team, not a top 10 team. Cardinals against the Vikings, 34-33. That's a struggling Vikings team that they barely beat. Cardinals against the Jags, arguably the worst team in football, 31-19. They should have blown them out. If they are truly the second best or third best team in the league, they need to be able to run away with that instead of just letting them sit there and kind of exist like they did for most of that game. Because if I remember correctly, too, Trevor Lawrence was leading at half.
Rams, after the field goal return for a touchdown, the Jags took the lead.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Cardinals, Rams. The Cardinals kind of blew out the Rams there, so I was happy to see that. It kind of fortified some of my confidence in them to make sure that they are, I do believe that this is a top 5 team, but I don't think they're better than the Cowboys, and they reaffirmed that by only beating the Niners by 7. They beat up on Trey Lance. They really did. But Trey Lance is a very raw rookie quarterback who needs so much more time. And he rushed for like 80 yards or something like that on 15 or 16 rushes. Sure, impressive for a rookie quarterback. But at the same time, the Cardinals should have handily taken care of that. Now, in-division games are typically a little bit harder, but I want to see the Cardinals run away with games before I anoint them better than the Cowboys. Because the Cowboys, they lost to the Bucs by 2 in the opening game of the season. They put up a fight against one of the best teams in football. I think that the Cowboys are better than the Bucs, even though that they lost to the Bucs. Once again, week 1, kind of like the Chargers with the Cowboys in week 2. You got the Cowboys beat the Chargers 20-17, beat the Eagles, not a top 10 team, but I would contend that they are a top half team in the NFL, beat them by 20 points, 41-21. Really started to expose Jalen Hurts. I have a couple of Philly fans who are not happy with Jalen Hurts after that game and were like, hey, this is starting to be an issue. They beat the Panthers by 8 points, and really it wasn't as close as that score indicates. And then they just blew out the Giants yesterday. They let a rookie receiver drop 190 yards on them. Sure, that's great. And then, half of the Giants got hurt. So obviously it was going to be a harder game to play. But at the end of the day, they still blew them out. They didn't let them just sit there like a lot of teams do, like the Cardinals did with the Jags and other plays like that. So that's why I believe personally that the Cowboys are a top 3 team in the NFL right now. And I hate to say it. Because I hate the Cowboys. I hate the Cowboys more than I love the Washington football team. That is a fact. That is the trivia for Zach Miles that y'all can have for the rest of your life. When it comes to the Cowboys, they are my least favorite team in the history of the world. But with that said, they're one of the best teams in the NFL, and it should reflect it.
My next point, I have the Rams as being a little bit higher. I think that we've been a tad too harsh on them since the Arizona game. So we have them in this list at 5. I have them around the 3. The reason that I feel this way is because when I look at the Rams, I see a team that I believe is currently underperforming their talent. Now, whenever I say I believe this team is underperforming their talent, and then I look at their record and I see they're 4-1, that usually says to me, wow, this team has a ceiling that is crazy. Right now, I do not think the Rams are playing anywhere near their ceiling. I think that their defense is underperforming significantly. And I think from what I watched on this week's Thursday night game, it looked like Matt Stafford was not 100%. I know he had an issue with one of his fingers. He tried to claim that it wasn't impactful, but he missed a couple wide open throws with an injury to his throwing hand at the start of that game. That game could have gotten away from the Seahawks much sooner than it did. So I believe that the Rams have a much higher ceiling. I believe they're a very talented team. And once they figure out what they're doing wrong and figure out why things aren't firing on all cylinders, I think they're going to show us that they do deserve to be a top 3 team. And I think they'll show us that they do have the talent to be there.
And my last point of contention with our top 10 list here too. This is probably going to be the most unpopular opinion that I'll get the most text on, but this is a thing that I genuinely believe. I think the Chargers are the number 1 team in the NFL. I think that the Chargers, and it's a little bit of projection as well, but like I don't say something unless I mean it. And with the Chargers, I think Justin Herbert is special. I think that everybody missed in the draft community, whether it was on fantasy football Twitter or even in the NFL, like that kid should have been the first overall pick. Thank goodness he wasn't, because the Bengals probably would have ruined him. But at the end of the day, I mean, like, he's surrounded by incredible offensive talent. He has such good coaching. And like Anthony Lynn was a good coach last year. Unfortunately, they lost 11 games, something along 10 games, 11 games last year. And they were all, relatively speaking, 1 or 2 score games or even less than that. So it's just like, it's a weird situation in which he came through as a rookie. But when you look at who it is that the Chargers have already beaten versus who the Bills have beaten, the Bills are beating up on bad teams. They should be beating up on bad teams. The Chargers lost to the Cowboys week 2. Obviously, already talked about that. I think that is a much more forgivable thing than losing pretty distinctly to the Steelers in week 1. Now, there's a thing when it comes to momentum in the NFL. The Ravens ended up winning a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco, pretty much based on momentum. They got hot at the right time. Joe Flacco got hot at the right time. And I think that everybody will agree with that. And now it's when the whole entire Joe Flacco's elite conversation came up. Also, I still disagree with that, because if he were, he would still be balling right now. And my man's barely in the league. All right, back to that. Sorry, I have to throw my shade at my Baltimore fans with that.
Joe Flacco is an elite family man. He is an elite father, and he is an elite businessman. I've seen his commercials, and his monotone voice is so good for ads.
Yeah, so I'm guessing you felt the same way I did. Maybe he wasn't so elite then.
He is elite in the playoffs, and he is terrible in the regular season.
He had 1 great playoffs. Anyways, that's not what this is about. So back to what I was saying. With the Bills, Josh Allen in those first 2.5 games was not proving to be the guy that he was last year. He's doing it now. And this past week, he ran a lot more, which was really, honestly, it was good to see, because that is such a significant part of his game. And maybe that's what he needed. But until I see the Bills square up and blow somebody out who's good, or at least play as well as, in my opinion, as competitively as the Chargers have played, because here's part of it too. The Bills are not playing tight games. They're blowing out bad teams. They're not playing tight games. If they were playing tight games, I kind of want to see, do they have that clutch factor? Josh Allen in his first 3 years did not. He was constantly making mistakes in moments where it mattered. Right now, Herbert is showing in moments where it matters, he steps up. You could argue if you don't have a moment that matters and you just blow somebody out, you're all good. But you're not going to do that with the best teams in the league. I think that, just based off of my own opinions here, y'all, and this does not fully reflect what the podcast believes, obviously, the Chargers at the end of the year are going to be the number 1 team in football. Whether or not they win an NFL championship, Super Bowl, that's completely out of our control. Any given Sunday, things can change. But with that said, the Chargers are my number 1 team, bar none.